Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Field Report from the Land of the Snow Leopard, presented by Nat Hab Expedition Leader Conan Dumenil. I'm your host, Rob Best. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Over to you, Conan.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Rob. Thank you so much for that introduction. A big hello to all our virtual travelers joining us today. I am super excited to talk about this particular trip while it's still fresh, because I just got back from running our first season last week. So we were extremely fortunate and I think provident enough that we were able to kick off this season, our very first snow leopard season, after waiting for a few years now, and especially the last couple of years. And we got the end of the season and finished very strong with successfully running 5 different trips this season. So it gives me great pleasure to talk to you about a trip that's just concluded. And I also like to give a shout out at this moment to some of our travelers who emailed me, who just got back from the trip themselves and emailed me saying that they're going to be joining the webinar as well. So welcome everybody, and let's get started. So this trip, the Land of the Snow Leopard, like I said, it's our very first season running this in the region of Ladakh, and we've had an excellent season. We've been very fortunate weather-wise, and we've been extremely fortunate and extremely grateful that we've had some great wildlife sightings as well. Now, Ladakh is a land of extremes, and we run this trip especially in winter, because that's one of our best seasons to spot animals. And because we are up in the mountains, weather can change very, very drastically. So a little inside joke there, when you're not freezing, you're actually having a lot of fun there. And, on the contrary, this season, we've been very, very lucky. Like I said, weather-wise, we started our first trip in March, and we finished our 5th trip in April. So we ran 5 back-to-back trips in Ladakh, and it was perfect timing because it coincided with the onset of spring. It was towards the end of winter, so there was much less snow than we normally encounter at the beginning of winter, though this trip will, in the following seasons, will start at the beginning of winter. So here's a few pictures of us out in the field. The one on the left with me standing in the snow is from a previous year, and that's right in the middle of January. And then by the time we finished our trips in April, it was all, most of the snow had dried up, except for the ones on the top, the peaks. So here we are. This is the Land of the Snow Leopard. This is the region of Ladakh. And while there is no typical landscape picture I can show you, because the landscape is so varied, this is something that will give you a nice snapshot of it. Ladakh is a high altitude desert. It's located in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, on the border with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Tibet. And the landscape is mountainous. And because it's in the rain shadow area of the Himalayas, it actually gets very, very less rain. So a lot of it, which you'll see if you go at this time of the year, is actually dry and barren. But is it barren? And that's a question that I will answer as we go through the webinar. So this is your kind of a typical scene in Ladakh. You have the smaller hills, and I say smaller, but all of these are about 11,500 feet already. And then you have the higher hills in the background, the 2 ranges, the Zanskar and the Ladakh range, that are snow-capped, and a lot of it stays under snow for most of the year. Now, where are we exactly? Now, if you first look at the map to your right, the larger one, you see the dark brown areas in the middle, which is actually the Himalayas. Now, the high Himalayas run from the northern western part of India to the eastern part of India, and Ladakh is situated on the rain shadow area of the Himalayas. So it's north of the Himalayas. So we actually cross the Himalayas while you go to Ladakh. And you see the region insetted in the small red portion to the left map, that's the entire region of Ladakh. Now, Ladakh used to be part of the greater state of Jammu and Kashmir in India, and which is now 2 years ago, it was bifurcated into a separate territory by itself, governed by the central government, and the entire district of Ladakh, which was part of Jammu and Kashmir, is now called the Union Territory of Ladakh, and that's the red portion you see there. So our itinerary is 10 days long, the trip which we do to go up there and see snow leopard, and our first entry point is Delhi. So we arrive into New Delhi, where we spend one night, just to rest up, take a break from the long travel which you've traveled from the States, and meet with your team, meet with your expedition leader who's there. And we have a little orientation dinner and a presentation that happens at Delhi. And after that, without further ado, we fly straight to Leh, which is the capital city of Ladakh. So on day 2, we fly to Leh, and we spend the first couple of days, which is mandatory to spend there and acclimatize to the high altitude. Now, Leh is situated at around 11,000, 11,500 feet. And because we fly in there, we need to take the first 2 mandatory days to acclimatize and let our bodies adjust to it. Now, after we do the acclimatization day in Leh, we head off for 5 nights out to our exclusive lodge at a small village called Mangyu, which is about a couple of hours drive from Leh. So from there, and then we spend the rest of the week at the lodge doing what we meant to do, look for wildlife and have some beautiful views of landscapes and see what we see. Once we finish up almost a week long at the lodge, we come back to Leh for a night to welcome showers at the hotel we stay there, and then fly back to Delhi to connect to our flights home. So that's the itinerary in a snapshot, right? So let's take it day by day. So this is our hotel where we stay near Delhi. This is actually in a place called Gurgaon, which is a suburb of Delhi, more or less. It's a separate. It falls in a different state, but then what it does is it's actually accessible to Delhi Airport. So we're only about 20 minutes away from Delhi Airport, and because we don't have much to do in Delhi and a lot more interesting things to do in Ladakh, we stay as close to the airport as possible. The hotel itself is the Trident Gurgaon. It's a very opulent hotel, a perfect place to kind of start your trip and sort of get used to the whole, get used to the Indian environment, and then sort of fly off to Leh. So very, very comfortable hotel, very, very luxurious, I must say, and a great place to start with. So we board our flight from Delhi Airport, where we fly to Leh. It's only about an hour and change, the flight, but it's an interesting flight nonetheless. Short, but super spectacular, because you have the most magnificent views as you fly over the Himalayas. And from both sides of the aircraft, you have beautiful views through the windows. You fly over the high Himalayas first, which are snow-capped through the year, snowbound through the year. And then as we make our descent into Leh, you'll see the landscape change, and we see beautiful large rivers coming into view. And then into the great valley of the Indus is where sits the capital city of Ladakh, the city of Leh. Now, Leh has a military airport, and that's the airport which is also used for civilian operations as well. It's a town that has about 250,000 people in Leh. It's a small town, and in winters, there's sort of a lower activity level that happens. In summers is when they make most of their tourism, and where a lot of tourists also come in. But where we are, we kind of see the city as it is with its local population in the winter. Now, this again is a picture from a couple of weeks ago. So you see most of the snows from the town is gone, but there's still snowbound surroundings. So at Leh, we stay in the beautiful Grand Dragon Hotel. Now, this is another perfect place to start with. It's a 5-star hotel. It has all the luxuries and amenities you might need, and the rooms are well made. It's heated. We've got ensuite bathrooms, and you've got practically everything that you need in a hotel. And the reason why we chose this hotel is because you always want to start off with a very, very comfortable environment. And this is where we also come back to on our last day for that much needed hot rain shower, after spending a week out in the wilderness. So the Grand Dragon Hotel, the first day when we arrived there for breakfast. So we have a large, sumptuous breakfast, and then the rest of the day is actually just spent at leisure at the hotel. Now there isn't much to do, and rightly needed, because that's the day we need to sort of get used to the altitude, get used to our surroundings, and just listen to our bodies and make sure we are starting off on the right note. So after breakfast that day and after quick orientation, we will have the day at leisure to sort of potter about in your room, walk around the hotel if you need to, but also get a lot of rest and get a lot of hydration in your system because we have the entire week ahead of us and we're going to be out in the wilderness. On day 3, we start a short excursions. Of course, we will go out by car, and we'll take a lot of stops on the way, visiting monasteries, looking at the landscape, taking pictures, and then doing a little bit of physical exercise by walking out a bit, taking stock of how we are doing and how we are coping with it. So it's going to be a very overtly easy day, but we need to do that because everyone takes different times to adjust, and it's important that the entire group stays in good health and in good stead because the adventure that awaits us. So we will visit a couple of monasteries that day, take a lot of pictures, go out in some wilderness areas, and while we're out in the wilderness areas, we're also trying to get a gauge of what the landscape looks like, what the landscape feels like, what the weather is like, and also see some fantastic wildlife. So usually on the first day, we go out looking for a couple of target species we have in mind. Blue sheep, quintessential Himalayan wildlife. These animals live up at really high altitudes. They're found across the entire Trans-Himalayan region. And this is one of the special Himalayan wildlife which we look out for. The big male you see is in the center of the frame and surrounded by females and young ones. These are called blue sheep because of the dark blue patches that they have when they mature. Males have a lot more of them on the underside of the chest and the legs. And we often look along these bare mountain slopes because they're feeding off seemingly nothing, but apparently there is a lot to eat. The other animal out there is the beautiful Tibetan partridge, again, a species that is special to the region. We don't find them anywhere else in the subcontinent except in the Trans-Himalayan region of Ladakh, Spiti, and then onwards to Tibet. Now, these are small animals, small birds, which you usually see close to the villages, and they feed off grain and any shrub that is around there. It's also a great time to look out for raptors. We have a couple of special raptors, large ones, which include the golden eagle, Himalayan griffin, as you see in the picture here, and also another vulture called the lammergeier, or the bearded vulture. So at the end of day 3, we come back. We usually carry a packed meal or do a picnic meal out at a lovely spot somewhere in the wilderness, and then we will return back to the Grand Dragon Hotel early evening to kind of get acclimatized again and have a shower and wash up, change up, and get ready for the next day. Because on day 4 is when we leave to our wilderness lodge. Now, before we set off to the lodge, this is something we started doing this season, and it worked out wonderfully well. We go early morning to one of the most famous monasteries in the region called Tikse Monastery. It's also one of the largest monasteries. And we start off with a very auspicious move by attending one of the prayer or blessing ceremonies that the monks conduct at the monastery. Of course, I'm not showing you pictures of that because we don't take any pictures during the ceremony, but it's a wonderful ceremony to start off with. And even for the non-religious people amongst you, it's good to start on a good note, because the locals believe that any journey undertaken always starts off with a monastery or a shrine So keeping in with local tradition, we start off with the monastery. We also do, apart from the blessing ceremony, we have a wonderful guide who takes us around a short walk, orienting us to Buddhism, to some of the beliefs, some of the philosophies surrounding Buddhism. We look at some of the practices as well that take place and understand some of the bits of the architecture and significance of some of the symbolism and iconography in Buddhism. So it's a beautiful peek into not just the religion, but that religion itself, Buddhism itself, is so entrenched into the local culture in people's daily lives. And it's good to start off with just understanding where that comes from, and we'll have a lot of conversations during the week, even while at the lodge, about how important the Buddhist philosophy is in everyday life. Once we finish with the monastery, we head back to the hotel, pack our bags, and we head off into our wilderness lodge to track snow leopards. Like I said, the drive is only about a couple of hours away, but again, we will stop along the way to get in some of the beautiful vistas, look for animals along the way. It could be sheep, mountain sheep. It could also be wolves. It could be anything that we see along the way on our drive there. So we take a nice and easy drive to the lodge, admiring the beautiful landscape along the way. Once we reach the lodge, and this is a cute little lodge located in the village of Mangyu. It was a homestay run by a local family. It still is owned by a local family. Of course, some additional additions have been made and some renovations have been made to bring it up to standard and to suit international travelers. So there's been some additions to the lodge, but otherwise the architecture still stays the same and still stays local. It sits on top Mangyu village, and this is the view out from the front door of the lodge. So once you open out and you look from the front yard, it overlooks the rest of the valley. We drive up from the valley, so you look at the valley opening down with you, that's the road head, and we drive up to the lodge, and our lodge actually sits almost at the top of Mangyu Valley, and you see houses and little farmlands all spread out beneath you. And we face east, so every morning that's what the sunrise looks at from the lodge. So if you're an early riser, it's a beautiful sunrise. You see it coming right over the tops of the hills, and it just floodlights the valley with this beautiful golden glow. At the lodge itself, this is what our dwellings look like. It's humble, but it's also very, very comfortable. We've got proper beds and mattresses. Some of the warmest, thickest mattresses available in northern India have made it to the lodge. We've also got very, very comfortable duvets. And for those cold mornings and nights, we have two kinds of stoves, a wood-fired rocket stove, as they call it up in these parts, as well as an electric radiator as well. Now, on the left is a common lounge space. This is where we have all our discussions, our talks, hangout, and also our meals will be had in the lounge space. So it's a good communal area. It's good to a good place to get to know other people as well. There is a permanent station of tea, coffee, and the soft drink set up there with water. So anytime you need something to drink, you can come up and help yourselves to it. The bathrooms are very, very comfortable, and it's got all the facilities in there. What is not present at the moment is running water, but there is a constant supply of water, which is supplied by the lodge staff in buckets. Now, that's one of the questions which we often get is how do we use the buckets? Well, it's not rocket science, but it does take a little bit of getting used to, but you will. So it's not, there is no scarcity of water at the moment, thankfully. So buckets of water will be provided, both hot and cold water will be provided by the staff, making your stay very, very comfortable, and keeping your mind off all these trivial things, where your mind focused on the main thing that's out there, and that is to spot wildlife. So a typical day at the lodge starts up at sunrise, though you don't have to wake up at first light. Our spotters are usually up every morning. We have a magnificent team of spotters, and they start at sunrise, and they go out and they set up their scopes at various vantage points. Some of them will take short walks and go to different areas and look at different valleys, and they'll set up the scopes. And then once they find something, they will radio in. This, in fact, is a picture from one of our last days at the lodge. We saw a snow leopard on a ridge right outside our front yard. So this is the front yard of the lodge, and we're all standing there. Some of us didn't even need to change from our pajamas, but we're all standing there looking at snow leopards right there from the front yard. So all the ridges and mountains that surround the lodge have a lot of wildlife going in. And mind you, this is not a national park or a protected area. This is just wilderness area on the outskirts of habitation, and it abounds with a lot of wildlife. So, to answer your first question, the landscape looks barren. Does it support anything? Yes, it does, and it does support a lot. So while the spotters are out looking for animals, we actually can start our day quite leisurely with a very, very good breakfast at a very, very reasonable hour in the morning. And what we usually do is we tell our travelers to have a to-go bag ready. So in case we get news of a sighting happening somewhere, we are off in the cars like that. But otherwise, if we don't have any sightings, we start off with a leisurely breakfast, lots of good coffee, OT if that's your thing, and then start the day. So we plan the day every day at breakfast, because it all really depends on what animals are moving where and what the action is outside in the vicinity. And then we'll decide, do we need to drive up to a place, or do we need to hike up to a place, or we'll just stand around the lodge if there's something interesting to be looked at from there. A lot of our time is spent scoping out or spotting through scopes. Our lodge, we have a team of spotters, and each one of them carry a scope, plus we have extras as well. But it's highly recommended you bring your own binoculars as well, because that can make the experience so much more better, because once we're scanning off all these slopes and ridge lines, having a pair of binoculars, or if you have your own scope, makes a lot of difference. Entire days sometimes can be just spent looking from one spot, or maybe a couple of spots, scanning the ridge lines, scanning every single rock and nook and cranny there, looking for wildlife, and often we will see something. And when we do, there's often a crowd around the scope, as you can see in the picture in the middle. And all that excitement even gets some of the locals. This is actually our owner's grandson, who very often would come up and meet us before he went to school in the morning, and we give him a scope to look at, and he actually finds a lot of things. I think that's a picture of him looking at some ibex on the ridge close by to the lodge. So it is a very exciting activity. We'll scope, and having these scopes actually give us a better view at things and help us see things in detail. So how does scoping work? So we use a combination of some of the best scopes in the market. We use Swarovski and Zeiss scopes, which have some amazing optics. We also couple them with a cell phone to give you results such as these. So that's a few Uriel there grazing on the hillside. You can barely see them with the eye, but once you set them to the scope, it opens up a whole new world, and you can actually have some fantastic observations of their behavior without being too intrusive. In fact, as where wildlife viewing is considered, this is one of my favorite parts, is because the animals practically don't know, or they don't feel threatened by your presence there at all, and so they completely go about their natural behavior, and you're sitting at a very safe distance, at a very comfortable distance, observing them as they would, as natural as possible. And of course, looking through the scopes also give you much better detail as to what you're looking at, apart from just otherwise would otherwise seem a gray or a brown speck. on the side of the hill, which is also gray or brown. But it gives you more detail, and like I said, you could spend hours, watching them without them being anyway threatened by your presence. And that's how we set it up. We set it up with a camera sometimes, and with a cell phone, I beg your pardon. And with that, it also helps a lot more people to actually view through these scopes. And here we are looking. I think it was a female snow leopard with a couple of her cubs. And here we are, without squinting our eyes to the scope, looking at this animal on, through HD on a good iPhone screen. But not all of it is scoping from distance. Sometimes we do hike when we get news of some activity within a particular region or in a valley. We do have to walk a little bit. Of course, the walk is not easy, but it's neither difficult. I say it's not easy because we are at great elevations, and while you may be a strong and fit person, you may find some difficulty as you walk and breathing. But having said that, this is a trip that is relatively doable. Sorry, it's relatively easy and very doable as long as you're in some degree of fair fitness, right? So, and we also don't do this at great pace, and that's the reason why we have a large team of support staff helping us, and it's an area that's absolutely safe. So even if you are not the fastest of walkers, you can always catch up with the rest of the group, and we make sure that everyone has good opportunities at seeing something. So if a question on your mind is, hey, I'm reasonably fit, but I'm getting along with age, or I'm not the fastest walker, well, don't you worry. Provisions can be made on this trip, especially with the walking, sort of catch up and keep with the group. We often will travel to different places using the cars as backup with us. We always have support vehicles with us, and the support vehicles not only carry first aid, but they also carry snacks and refreshments. So times of the day where sometimes we have to go out and scan, ridges that are not close to the lodge, maybe an hour or hour and a half drives away. We have these vehicles with us to support, and that's a picture of us sitting there looking at sundown. As the sun goes down, we're waiting for a snow leopard to appear. So our cars are always close by with us, and they often bring us copious quantities of tea, snacks, cookies, and all of that. While if you've had your fill of scoping out and just want to sit down, relax, and just take in some of the landscape while the spotters are doing all the hard work, you just want to sit and take a moment and just be present. It's absolutely possible, and we highly recommend this as well. There's also times where we will carry a picnic lunch with us. So lunch will meet us at a spot because, of course, we have important things to do. We're out where the animals are, and that's what we spend most of our day with. We're trying to look for as many animals as we can, and we don't want to let trivial things such as what's going to be for lunch, or do we have to get back for lunch, bother and mess up our schedule. So if you're out with your animals, lunch will reach us, and we set it up often in a nice place, so have a quick bite to eat while we're out in the wilderness and not missing on any of the wildlife action. Speaking of wildlife, I'm sure this is the part where most of you are probably interested in what kind of wildlife we see. So let's take a look at some of this fantastic wildlife that exists in this Himalayan landscape. I had to use this one, not this kind, but Harry, if you're watching, I had to use this picture. It was too good to resist. But that's Harry, folks, and what he's got was a burrel, a blue sheep skull, a Uriel skull, which we found right there. Some of the animals we see, Tibetan Partridge, they are probably one of the most plentiful birds you see in Ladakh. Super cute. You often hear them more because they also blend in very well with the landscape. But we had this pair of chukar which would come every evening to the lodge and go and sit on this outcrop just below our front yard, and that's where we got pictures of them. They're great birds. to see pretty birds when you get up close, and also very photogenic if you have the equipment with you to take pictures. So Tibetan Partridge, one of them. Ibex, one of the most fantastic animals. This mountain goat, it defies laws of physics, and to see them on these absolutely narrow paths that probably a couple of inches wide, you see them walking up. This is the young one, and young ones always have the habit when they see you, they'll get up on this really narrow pathway and kind of peep back and kind of almost tauntingly look at you and say, hey, can you do this? Can you do what I'm doing? But ibex are such magnificent creatures, especially if you see a large male. They're much darker in color, and they have this beautiful white saddle on the back and these massive horns. And these ridges in their horns come with age, and the larger the horn, the older the ibex, and the longer the beard. So this is a big male, and they're often at the center of the herd, and the herd is usually a mixed herd of both males, females, and young ones. While we're out at the riverside, it's good to look for a truly spectacular bird called the ibisbill. And as you see right in the middle of the frame, they can blend really well with the rocks and shingles on the riverbank. These birds are known to come back to specific spots on rivers year after year after year. So if you find one, it's probably going to come back the following year. They migrate, and they're known to come in only the most pristine of Himalayan rivers. Very little is known of this bird, so it's a special bird to see on the trip. Some of the other ungulates to be seen is the urial. This again is an animal that is endemic to the Indus River Valley. So while they're plentiful to see in Ladakh, they're only seen in Ladakh and nowhere else in the world. So these are also called red sheep locally. The official name is urial, and you see them sometimes in herds grazing along either close to the river or on lower slopes where there's grass and not so much lower, smoother slopes, not as rugged as where the ibex would be. So apart from all of these ungulates, we also have animals such as the red fox. We have wolves, you have marmots, you have pikas, you have woolly hair, and tons and tons of birds to be seen there. Of course, these pictures, except for this one here, which is taken a few years back, these are pictures which are taken over the last couple of weeks on the trips. So if you're thinking of a visual reference point of what you might expect and how you might go about pictures, these are pictures of some of the truly spectacular animals that we have here in Ladakh. Now, we are lucky sometimes to get close enough to get pictures of animals, but again, I must warn you that looking for wildlife in Ladakh, or in India by that extension, is not, and I say this with all due respect, is not an African safari. Sometimes traveling in Southern Africa or Eastern Africa, you sometimes spoil for choice, literally, with the abundance of animals that you see here. Here, you see there, here the animals make you work for it. And to prove that point, I have this picture. So this is a shot of an animal in its landscape. This is taken with not heavy zooms. Can you spot the animal here? I'll give you a couple of seconds. No? Maybe that will help. And if you're still thinking, what the heck is he talking about? Where is an animal here? I'll zoom in there. So now can you see it? Still no? There we go. Okay, so that's a picture of a snow leopard, ladies and gentlemen. That's a male, and we saw him walk the ridge line right at the top, and then he came down to this little patch of snow where he's actually hydrating himself by licking the snow. And often our sightings are like this, right? And what actually throws a lot of people off is the sense of scale. Now, when we look at mountains and we look at them through the scope, we look at various rock formations, we're looking at caves, we're looking at crevices, trying to find animals. But when you see an animal in this landscape, it only then does it truly give you a size of scale or the vastness this wilderness that's in front of us. And it is actually looking for a needle in the haystack. But we do. It's not hard. It is a lot of work, but we do see some fantastic sightings of wildlife in this place. And what I have for you in the coming slides is just two of my favorite snow leopard sightings that we saw this season. And the first one is from the first trip I took over there. So here it's a little bit more obvious. You can see the snow leopard sitting out in snow. And I'll just let this play for you. So here we've got a picture. We've digi-scoped this out. So we've got a cell phone attached to the scope. And we saw him on a far ridgeline, and he came down the ridgeline and into some really heavy snow while he walked all the way in front and across us. And this was towards the later part of the evening. And we had some brilliant views of this male snow leopard. One of the most fantastic sightings, probably the sighting of the trip of the season, I would say, was on the very first snow leopard trip. And I think it was on the very second day that we saw this. So here is Mama Snow Leopard. We were watching her for quite some time. We walked up into this valley and we saw her for a good, I think, hour and a half from a reasonable distance of probably a quarter of a mile away. We could see her very clearly sitting on the rock with our binoculars. We watched her for a while. And then after watching her, we decided to back off a little bit. We backed off a couple of 100 yards, and after we did that, we saw this. She had called to her cubs. They had killed an ibex. She had killed an ibex, and she had called to her cubs to come down. And after we backed off a fair distance, we set up a camera. There was one camera set up there, and we got this fantastic footage while we were watching her from the scopes. So here you see Mama's in the middle, surrounded, flanked on both sides by her cubs. And this was truly a fantastic sighting to see these animals there in the wilderness, not bothered by our presence, not so much, maybe slightly uncomfortable at the beginning, but then later on when we backed off, she came down with the cubs, and then they went just completely natural behavior. And watching this is truly a privilege. Of course, a lot of these sightings will not be possible if I don't mention our truly awesome and fantastic spotters. At the lodge, we have a team of 4 spotters, and with the neighboring lodge, another 4. And with these gang of spotters, we scan all the valleys in the area, and they are out truly from sun up to sun down, scanning every single rock, every single crevice for these animals. And when they do, they radio back in, and then we go out in the luxury of our Jeep with our packed meals to set up while they've already set up, and then we just enjoy the moment while looking at this fantastic wildlife. So if it wasn't for the spotters, we'll probably miss more than 80% of the animals that are there, because it truly takes a lot of effort to see animals in this landscape, but when we see them, it's so much more fulfilling. And I'm actually quoting something that one of our guests said earlier about watching wildlife in this area. And so what I'm going to show right now is I'm going to pause right. I'm going to show you some comments and feedbacks from a couple of our guests from one of the trips.
Oh man, where do I start? Just seeing, I think seeing the animals, you can't compare it to Africa, because Africa, they're wandering around, but it's more meaningful and special because the animals there's less of them and you have to be patient. But when you do see them, it's much more of a wow experience.
The thing I think is so impactful is the diversity of the landscape. I came from with a vision of it being snow-capped mountains, all consistent. And this is every place you look, it changes immediately from rock to sand to different types of rock to snow, all of that. And so there's a beauty of it and majesty that I really didn't expect. And then we saw the snow leopard on our very first day, and could watch it walking across the tops of the mountains. So it was really spectacular.
All of the people are extremely kind, extremely gentle, very polite, very respectful. And, you know, they live in these really tough conditions where, you know, the temperatures can be extreme, but they are very supportive of each other. They're very welcoming. It really can't get any better.
From someone that comes from the flatlands of Florida, it was a little bit challenging for me. Breathe the altitude. I just took it slow, and the team members, no one pressured me into or made me feel like I was going too slow. I just took my time, and I was fine.
I think it's pretty well laid out by Nat Hab what to bring, to be aware of. So I think you know, I wasn't surprised by anything or unprepared.
Okay, that's good. All right, I'd like to thank Shelley and Jan for doing that interview for us and sharing your feedback with travelers. And I think that will really help, I think, everyone else watching to hear it directly from people who have been on the trip to know what it's like and what to expect. But, you know, they summed it up really well in what the entire experience was. It is truly spectacular landscape like nowhere else, probably on this planet. It is some amazing wildlife and wildlife moments which we have there, and all of that only makes it meaningful only because of the warmth and hospitality of the amazing people that live there. And we get to experience this warmth and hospitality firsthand, living in a lodge that's owned locally. In fact, one of the evenings they call us to their house, which is right over Shelley's shoulder there, and you know, treat us to an evening of Ladakhi cuisine and, you know, hospitality. And it's truly the people, the spotters that you know, that find us these animals, the staff that live at the lodge and service the lodge. We're interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, and we're all in this one place and all this one unit, and we really bond over the time. And you can see that warmth and exuberance that radiates from them that truly makes this trip spectacular. So I hope this very short sort of snapshot of Ladakh, it was really hard to pick cherry pick images to show you of the landscape or the wildlife that we've seen there. But unfortunately, we are pressed for time. So I just had to be very, very, just very hard to pick certain images. But I hope this gives you a better understanding of what this trip was. And before I close, I'd actually like to hand it over to you, Rob, to hear from our viewers if they have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Conan. Now, before we start the question and answer session, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to some questions. So can you talk about what altitudes are we going to be experiencing on this trip? Lots of questions about altitude.
Great. So the city of Leh, which is our first point after we leave Delhi, is about 11,500 feet, right? And at that elevation, it is the elevation you need to spend a couple of days at minimum to acclimatize, right? And we do this with good reason, because you need that time. So 2 days completely there to acclimatize. And while we are in Leh, the first day is completely at leisure. And the only thing we permit people to do is probably pack and unpack and just probably walk around the room a little bit. Even though you're raring to go and everything charged, you have to take it slow. A second day, we go out a little bit. We try and go a little higher, maybe a couple of 100 feet higher, but we always come back down. And then walk a little bit, do a little bit more physical activity compared to the previous day, and every day we take it up a notch. So the logic in, and this is based off a lot of studies, is that we start at an elevation usually anywhere between 10 to 11,500 is a good place to start acclimatizing, and that's where we start. We take it very slow without pushing ourselves. We listen to the signs our body is giving us, and then every day we push up a little bit, and then we always come back down. So one of the rules about acclimatization is saying you climb high, but you sleep low, and which is what we do. And every day we take it up a notch. Now at the lodge, we are about the same elevation as Leh itself, maybe just slightly higher. But while we are there, that's our base. We always return to base in the evening, so it gives us time for body to adjust. And if there's an excursion which we need to take out of the lodge, the highest point we actually go to on this trip is about 14,000. But we always come back to 11,500 for the evening. So that gives your body time to adjust. So it is done with a lot of thought and planning and based off science and experience.
Great, thank you for addressing that. So this tour would be appropriate for me if I'm in good health and 70 plus years old, say.
Yes.
Good
Yes.
to know. Good to know. Can you talk about the food on the trip at all, and can it accommodate vegans or vegetarians?
Yes, vegetarian food in India is actually very, very easy to come by. In fact, all the places usually on any of the trips in India, there's always an option for vegetarian food. Vegan food is possible with as long as we have notice. And I think one of the best things about what our office does in Boulder is to speak to clients, so speak to prospective travelers, strike up a relationship with them, and have actually a very, very complete file on what their preferences are, what we need to look out for, and then plan accordingly. So I think my suggestion there would be is to speak to your adventure specialist up at Boulder, get in touch with someone, and they will actually help you through the whole planning process, what to be, and give you more details from what, unfortunately this webinar is restricted to giving you just the top, but once you start speaking to an adventure specialist, they will be able to advise you better, send you documentation, and help you make your decision. Rob, I just also want to add one point to the last point about being in reasonable health, and age is just a number, but the only thing which you also need to speak with your adventure specialist is also if you have any other medical conditions that we may be need to be made aware of, because the thing is with altitude by itself is there is absolutely no danger, but when you have other medical conditions, we need to be planned and prepared for, just to make sure that you're also adjusting well, and also whether you can or cannot make it on the trip. So the best thing to do is to check with your doctor and then speak to your adventure specialist about the trip if you have any specific health concerns.
Great, thank you for that, Conan. Much appreciated. Now, what is the best time of year to go on this trip, and how far in advance should we book to make a reservation?
Well, the best time of the year is the time we are there. It is between November to April. November, of course, is the start of winter. April is towards the end of winter, almost beginning of spring. And any time during those 4 months, our season is pretty good. It's pretty even throughout. There's hardly any big changes, except for some weather changes which will happen at spring. And Rob, as you and I were talking about earlier, like in Colorado as well, Ladakh experiences a lot of seasonal change with winds coming in, the snow melt, and all of that. But apart from that, in terms of wildlife sighting, great throughout. Now, how far in advance? I actually don't know the answer to this question. All I can tell you for now is that our next season is, from what I hear, is almost fully booked. And because we've had a backlog for 2 years of not operating this trip and then finally doing it, I think it's safe to say that seats are running out. So if you want to book fast. I would say get on the phone, speak to someone, speak to fantastic staff actually at Boulder, and find out when's the next opening as well. You can also check out on the website to see what dates are for the following years, for the following season. Check out those dates. We have two kinds of trips happening. We have the general snow leopard trip, and then we also have one specifically for photography. So if that's something you're looking for, get on the website, check out our dates. It's out there, and then speak to someone as soon as you can.
Good advice.
That sounds like a
Well, your whole webinar makes us want to come visit you out there, believe me. So how likely are we to see snow leopards on the trip? And are there trips where you may not see one?
Yes, there's always a possibility of not seeing wildlife. And I say this for actually any trip that happens in India and all the other trips which we guide here at the subcontinent. There are chances of not seeing something specific. You will see wildlife, and I always advise my travelers to keep an open mind and appreciate what you get. And like our travelers said in the interview as well, it is hard. You need to be patient, and there is a lot of effort that has to be made. Having said that, we have seen snow leopards on all 5 trips that we've done this season. It's the best time to be there, and it's one of the best places to see them. So when you have those two working in combination, and we're also spending considerable time up at the lodge to see snow leopards. So when you're doing all the 3 right things, chances are very, very high. It's one of the best places to see snow leopards in the world.
Are the snow leopards baited in any way to encourage sighting?
No, not at all. In fact, one thing which we do on all our trips is we try to be less intrusive as possible. When I say try to be, I mean our very presence in a landscape is intrusive if you look at it from an altruistic, from a nature perspective. But we do the right things, right? And with this trip, it actually gives you the space to be less intrusive. So we don't want to mess around with or interfere or influence the animal's natural behavior at all. So the kills which you saw in the video was a kill which they made by themselves. We of course have people scanning the valleys, and once we spot an animal on a kill, we stay at a safe distance. We stay at the distance that is conducive for both animal and us and ethically correct, so we don't influence their behavior. Because also think of it from this perspective: if your presence there drives away an animal from a kill, that snow leopard and a cubs are going to go hungry for a few days till they make another kill, and we don't want that. So our presence, the only thing we're bringing in is at a safe distance. We have our presence, but we don't interfere with their behavior at all. So no, there's no baiting whatsoever. It's only whatever happens out during the course of nature, we stand and watch.
Good, great. Thank you for addressing that as well. So let's talk about the ibex for a second. Is there a connection between the ridges on the horns of the ibex and age? And do the male ibex drop their horns every year? How does that work?
Yeah, so the ibex don't drop their horns. They are fixed permanently to their skull, and they grow through the years. Now, most of the ridges also correspond to a year of their growth. But of course, sometimes you will notice the gaps in the ridges towards the end are shorter. Also, it also depends on the level of nutrition these animals are getting. So, and also during the season. So sometimes in years of high feeding, there could be much more prominent ridges, and years where the animal has not received highest amount of nutrition, it could be lower. But again, all of these are variables. But as a general rule, yes, one ridge corresponds to 1 year of the animal's life.
Oh, that's interesting.
And only the males have the big horns, the scimitar-shaped horns. The females have much, much shorter horns.
So what is the magnification of the spotting scopes? And if we have our own, should we bring it?
Yes, if you have your own, I highly recommend bringing it. Also remember, you'll also have to carry a tripod as well for it. Nothing like your own scope if you have it. But again, that's not a deal breaker. Like I said, at the lodge, we have all the equipment. We have some of the best equipment. The scopes which we use go out anywhere between 40x to about 90x. So that means 40 times magnification to 90 times magnification, so 90 times more. To give you some perspective, most binoculars are around 8x to 10x, and the scopes go up to about 80 or 90, depending on the make of the scope we have.
So how large are the groups that go out on the tour, and how many scopes are provided for each group?
So we have our maximum group strength on this is 10, and so we have a minimum of 4 scopes. By next year, I think we might also have a couple more. But like I said, with the scopes, there's always we also do a communal sharing as well, and we find it very easy, especially when you set up a phone on the scope. Then there's at least 3 or 4 people who can view it. And many travelers have said that they find it easier to view it on the phone screen rather than find it in the scope. Just also keep in mind that sometimes when you're looking through the scope, it takes a while, especially if you don't use scopes on a daily basis. It takes a while to even find the animal in the scope, which is as hard as finding the animal in the overall landscape. So sometimes when you have the phone and you're able to focus and even use tracking, sometimes when you're using the video, it's a lot easier. And many travelers have said that it's easier to look through the digi screen on the scope, attached to the scope. And it's less eye strain, especially when you're looking at something for about 20 minutes or half an hour or more.
Good point. Well, unfortunately, Conan, that's the last question that we're going to have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for any closing comments you may have.
All right. Thank you, Rob, and thank you everyone for sending in your questions. I'd like to just close with this last image. This is one of my favorite images from the trip. It's out of focus, it's blurred, it's not the best light, but it's a picture of 2 snow leopard cubs happily bounding along the ridge line behind their mom, who you can't see, but tail stuck up in the air, just happy cats. And that's what I want to leave you with. It's been fantastic guiding the first season of this trip. We've had some fantastic travelers come in, and it's been so wonderful to share our experiences. And I hope this webinar has influenced you to make a decision. And please write to us, please contact the office if you have any questions. And we'd love to see you this side of the pond and in Ladakh to see this fantastic animal. And as they say in Ladakh, Jule.
Conan, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd like to also thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in how you can travel with Nat Hab, give us a call at the number on your screen or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us next week for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next week.